your shit back. Yo, don't run now. Come on back in here. He ain't run now. What's wrong? Why are you running? You look like a freak like that. What do you think about all these inbreds in Auburn? What's wrong with them?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
They all seem retarded. Can you explain that?
I have no idea what I don't even know.
Some kind of mental instability. And this where Harriet Tubman house is just right up the street there. Right up the street, family. She'd be turning over in her grave right now. Looking at this shit right here.
Fire, 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 every time. Fire, 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 every time. You are now doing Baba TV.
Peace and Black Power. This is Brother Reggie, and I am so proud to be back on Baba TV. It's been a while. Baba TV recorded this year's May 19th. This particular DVD that Brother Baba TV has is an incredible depiction of what had happened during the, most of the day on May 19th. So Brother Baba TV has the exclusive on our pilgrimage to El Hajj Malik El Shabaz's Sister Betty Shabaz's grave on May 19th, and many of the speakers. So I don't know how you're going to get your hands on it, but this is the exclusive DVD that you should have. That's a record. The work that Baba TV does is very special in the sense that Baba TV really focuses on the making of the individual. It's a kind of a timeline as to what a person's thoughts are at a particular time. So if you watch anyone that was on Baba TV and let's say 2011, you get to see them again 2012, you get to see them again at 2017 to see if they actually change. That's why we love Baba TV, because he does kind of like character interviews on a particular person. So, how can I say, you can see the growth of Sankofa. You can see Sankofa getting wiser by the year, stronger by the year. You can see Dr. Issa getting much more radical in his scholarship, right? Before, when he first came on the platforms, he was just giving you intellect. Now Dr. Issa is back to his real self that he was hiding as an activist scholar. Brother Reggie, you see the same. You see me emerging. My scholarship ignites my fire, right? And moves me to struggle. So, what I was talking about earlier on the other channel is that myself, Dr. Issa, and Brother Patrick DeLises is getting ready to serve parties our amicus brief, hoping that this plaintiff, this petitioner gets rid of such senatorial in the Supreme Court. In his writ, he mentions Dr. Issa and he mentions the work that we were doing, and he asked the court for an inquiry, which is a constitutional look at his rights and the rights of Africans. And that is a large part of our work that we've been doing on for a while. Now, what does this mean? What this means is that the United States has never, ever, ever looked at our rights as human trafficked peoples who were sovereign, who were converted to commerce. The transatlantic slave trade ended in 1807, to be finally ended in 1808 in the Americas. So that means the Declaration of Independence and the what America holds dear was only 40 years old. But inside America, there was millions of slaves. But what they don't tell you is that the millions of slaves that were here were dying because they were being worked up from sun up to sundown. So America was losing its slave population from its inception, 1776, on up to 1808. Then all of a sudden they make this treaty with Britain that the transatlantic slave trade is over. What they don't tell you is from 1808 to the 1860s, millions of Africans came into America, yet the transatlantic slave trade was gone. So they came in as human trafficked peoples with no status in the context of America. Ultimately, the Civil War happens, and those Africans, because they're still Africans, were converted to citizens. But their rights were never assessed. So Brother Reggie, Dr. Issa, and Patrick DeLises has found and charged the Supreme Court in the following cases. Gibbons versus Upton, Worcester versus Georgia, the United States versus Armistead, Prigg versus Pennsylvania, and Dred Scott versus Sanford, of not doing a constitutional inquiry on the rights of African people. Now, information like this you can only find on places like Baba TV. Why is this important? Because the reparation cases have all failed, and they will continue to fail because each and every one of them starts with that we were enslaved. Now, America says that when slavery was legal by American laws, the banks and everyone else that participated, it was legal. So they can never, ever be found guilty of their crimes. But Brother Reggie, Dr. Issa, and Brother Patrick DeLises Western America from the time period of 1808 to 1865, where the transatlantic slave trade was illegal, but millions and millions of Africans were transported into Brazil and Cuba and into the Americas. America has hidden that question. Now, I'm going to give you something exclusive, right? It just worked out. I was going to do it on Sanetta's channel, but he has some other guests, so I have to do it on Baba TV's channel. So I'm going to put it on my glasses. Because, you know, we're scholars. And our job is to dust off the books and to go deep into the pages of history. Now, what I'm getting ready to read is an indictment of white people to white slavers that you have never heard. You've never heard this. Now, this is so important because our rights were supposed to be enforced. But of all of the, watch this, from 1808 to 1860, in 1850, piracy or transporting of slaves was made a capital offense. So that means if it's made a capital offense, you must find some victims, some people who broke the law. Well, America only found 2 captains in this whole illegal slave trade guilty. One was pardoned by one president, and the other came in the time of Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln did not pardon Nathaniel Garden. Now there's some more to this, because when slavery became, transatlantic slave trade became illegal, the United States and the Europeans partnered. Now, the British captured over 80 slave ships on the high seas. America only captured 7 slave ships on the high seas. Of those 7 slave, now mind you, they're supposed to end the slave trade. How is America only capturing 7 ships, slave ships? Why? Because the price of slaves could be obtained from 1808 to 1860 for $40 worth of goods, but could be sold on the illegal market for $800 to $1,200. So slavery was a cash cow. It was like crack cocaine. It was like cocaine. So America's interest was in this illegal slave trade, just like the American dollar is basically backed by cocaine. You can't pull out an American dollar without a trace of cocaine on it. You can't do it, right? The American dollar is also connected to the slave trade the same way. So, of the 7 ships that America captured, only 1 white man was executed. I am going to read you his execution statement. And you've never heard these. So this is a sentence of a white slaver. It is proper that I should call to your mind the duty of preparing for that event which will soon terminate your mortal existence. This is a white man to a white man.
White judge.
A white judge to a white man. And usher you in the presence of the supreme judge. Let your repentance be as humble and thorough as your errings were great. This is a white judge getting ready to execute a white slaver. The only one that was executed.
A white federal judge. Not a state judge, a federal circuit judge.
And he was executed in New York by the Tombs. Where they call the Tombs at? That's where they held condemned prisoners to be hung.
See if y'all can leave that.
And this particular defendant, his name is Nathaniel Garden. Right? And it says, the judge continues to say, the federal judge, do not attempt to hide its enormity from yourself. Think of the cruelty and wickedness of seizing nearly 1,000 fellow beings who never did you harm and thrusting them beneath the decks of small ships beneath a burning tropical sun to die of disease or suffocation or be transported to distant lands and be consigned, they and their prosperity, to a fate far more cruel than death. So what he's saying is that he knows that from 1808 to this time, which is in the 1860s, 62, that they were still transporting Africans. Illegally. He says, think of the suffering of the unhappy beings whom you crowded on the ship Erie, on their helpless agony and terror as you took them from their native land in West Africa, and especially think of those who perished under the weights of their miseries. Remember that you showed mercy to none, carrying off as you did not only those of your own sex, but women and helpless children. This judge said, do not flatter yourself that because they belong to a different race from yourself, your guilt is therefore lessened. Rather fear that it is increased. In the just and generous heart, the humble and the weak inspire compassion and call for pity and forbearance. Watch this.
This is some heavy stuff from a white judge. From a white judge.
And we're going to tell you why this is important. As you soon, watch this, Dr. Issa. He says to the Nathan Gordon, the condemned man, as you soon to pass in the presence of that God of the black man, as well as the white man, seemingly two different gods, who is no respecter of persons, do not indulge for a moment the thought that he hears with indifference the cry of the humble of his children. Do not imagine that because others shared in the guilt of this enterprise, talking about the slave trade from 1808 to 1860, this enterprise is therefore diminished. But remember the awful admonition of your Bible, though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not go unpunished. And he basically says, turn to him for mercy. And they hung him, dead. Now, why is this important? This is important.
Break it down, Dr. Reggie. Break it down.
Because that judge understood that the African had never had his rights weighed against the Constitution of the United States. And that the slave trade was continuing. And that these Africans were bought from foreign lands. They were nationals of foreign lands. And the court still did not know what to do or classify these Africans. But my brother Dr. Issa and myself and brother Patrick, we understand that America has been hiding the biggest crime in the world, which is the crime of human trafficking.
Not slavery, but slavery was legal.
That's correct.
Human trafficking after 1808 became illegal. Thomas Jefferson spoke on it, about how illegal it was. President Madison, James Madison, talked about how illegal it was, and every other subsequent president spoke about the illegality of it. The United States even sent out African squadron ships to go and capture people, along with the British, who were engaging in human trafficking. We got to know the difference. And they brought in, according to W.E.B. Du Bois, in his classic study in 1898, the suppression of the African slave trade, that over almost 1 million Africans were brought into the United States after 1808, when the United States said it was illegal, and they were brought in not only by people of different countries, but by United States citizens, and government officials allowed it to happen and sometimes participated. That is the real crime that no one has really talked about. That is the crime, and that is the case for a new form of reparations that we are talking about, mostly coming from Brother Reggie, Dr. Reggie. An inquiry, a finding must be done on who the black man in America is from the government, like they did to the Native Americans in 1832 under Worcester versus the state of Georgia.
That's correct. So what we're doing is we're mixing for the first time African history and law. What we're saying, we have looked at the various Supreme Court cases when they were beginning to talk about Africans who were pirated, and all of these cases that happened after 1808, and then they decide not to talk about our rights and look at our rights against the United States Constitution. So they have failed in an inquiry to hide the human trafficking, not the slave trade, but the human trafficking, converting Africans into commerce for the purpose of forced labor. And they have hid this from the world, that their Constitution and its application will always be flawed, will always be dirty until they do an inquiry. Every time the African comes up, the human trafficked, pirated African, they hurry across because our experts have not had the reading, the understanding, the training to understand that to charge the Supreme Court that until you do a constitutional inquiry, no matter if you have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, that does not cure the errors of the Supreme Court.
And the only time that those amendments, which are commonly known as the African Enslavement Amendments, that everybody else is now taking advantage of on our backs, right? Where we're being left out. Those of us who are indigenous, who were brought here and enslaved illegally, right? The only time that we had full citizenship where it was protected, like the Native American, was from 1870 to 1877, only 7 years, where the federal government, the enforcement acts, and where the military was the country, the South was under martial law. And the military was protecting the rights of the newly freed Africans. And so the full protect, after that, after 1877, they put us right back into slavery.
Right, so the Supreme Court, what they did is the Supreme Court, by not doing the inquiry, stripped us of our unalienable rights.
That's it. Unalienable rights is the issue. This is what Reggie has been teaching me about.
Right. So Tammany now, he's a judge of the Amistad, and he is a judge of the Dred Scott. He says that the founding fathers never ever thought, when writing the Declaration of Independence, they never even considered us. So Tammany's opinion in the Supreme Court is a minimal construction and is an error in the Constitution because it was just his opinion. He didn't do no scholarly work. And how I know Tammany did not do any scholarly work is because in the Dred Scott case, which he presided over, he said that these Africans were kidnapped by the Spanish, they were not enslaved, and he sent them back to Africa. However, he did not apply that same thing to the Africans that were being kidnapped and hijacked under the flag of the United States ships. Why? Because slavery was so profitable. I'm talking about slavery was more profitable from 1808 to the Civil War to replenish the dead Africans that they were killing, working to death, than it was prior. And you got to understand, America only really had slaves imported legally from their laws from 1776 to 1807.
That's it.
So America during those periods did not import as many slaves into America as was imported from 1807 to 1860.
And from 1807 to 1860s, they weren't importing slaves. They were importing, like the brother we were talking to earlier from Ghana, African nationals who were a part of African kingdoms and African city-states in which to this day they have yet to give up their citizenship.
That's correct.
My ancestors never gave up their citizenship from those states that they took us from. And remember, Baba TV, Brother Baba, this is what I've been consistently talking about this from day one. From day one. So now we got this in a Supreme Court amicus brief that we'll be submitting sometime next week. We're not sure if the Supreme Court will look at it or not, but at least we left a powerful historical record at the highest level of jurisprudence in this country.
And we did it. And we did it. The scholars that you see every day, see, we're different type of scholars. There are people who just
Afrikan studies scholars.
That's right. We come from a tradition. We come from the tradition of John Clark and Du Bois.
Studies.
Right? And people underestimate Du Bois. They want to call Du Bois sell out a trader, but it's the boys that brought in the research method that we use. It is Du Bois. Everybody else were just activists working on good intentions, but Du Bois brought in the academic discipline, the rigor.
Along with the activism.
Correct. For us to be able to do our work. So we come from that tradition. We don't come from the tradition of just people running around because they are emotional. So that's why Dr. Issa, Brother Reggie, and Brother Patrick could go back and find what America had really done and find that the Pellman Farmer reparations case was done wrong. The HR 40 case has to be reconstructed. The bill in New York
to study slavery, a commission to study slavery in New York.
It should be the commission to study the human trafficking Africans, right?
And we brought this to the December 12th group. I spoke directly to Roger. I spoke directly to the Honorable Viola Plummer. I had several communications with Ms. Farmer, right? Pellman Farmer, about this and where we thought they did wrong. We're not necessarily saying that we're building on what they already did, but they can't keep making the same mistakes. Right? Because it's impacting all of us. These suits represent all of us. And the loss is not your loss, it's all of our loss.
And I'm not so kind. My whole point of it is that the way it was constructed was based on slavery. Slavery was legal for a time period. They didn't make the distinction as when the transatlantic slave trade ended. So from 1776, where this country came into being, 1775, 1776, to 1808, 1808, there's only about 40 years of United States, right? And it's construction. But more slaves came in from 1808 to 1860.
And New York was one of the capitals of this illegal activity.
That's correct.
Where they were building ships right here and financing it, doing that period.
For the purposes of human trafficking.
They don't know this.
For
this
the
new
purposes,
commission, they don't know this.
Right.
And if you want this information, you got to come to us.
Right. For the purposes of human trafficking. So, to be very careful, if you say slavery, then you're going to be limited because you got to understand that slavery was legal in United States laws, right? So we're not talking about that. We're talking about the whole concept of human trafficking. And that's a much more powerful construction because America was built on not slavery, but human trafficking Africans converted to slaves for the purpose of forced labor.
Right.
That is a whole new crime. Hey, peace to the fam. How y'all doing, man? Everything is good?
Peace.
I'm Brother Reggie. Hi. Dr. Issa and Brother Reggie. How you doing? With Baba TV. Peace to the family.
Right here. This brother got some original ideas. Dr. Reggie has been saying this. He told me this, that I was the first to really understand what he was saying. Right, and it took him a while to explain this to me, but I understood the premise because I had a case in D.C. that I'm still dealing with, that the judge and the system refused to do an inquiry. So when he brought it to me, but he was bringing it to me in the form of illegal human trafficking, it took me a while to get the concept until he started forcing me to read these case law, Supreme Court cases, to reread them, Dred Scott. And then when I did that, I said, oh my God, you're on to something. He's been trying to tell the people here in New York this for 10 years. He's on record, right? In Harlem, he talked about this. He's on record, but nobody listened. But now we got something in the Supreme Court.
And I'm not new to this because on the same panel that Pellman Farmer testified on the reparations in New York, hosted by Bill Perkins and council member at the time, Charles Barron, I testified there. So I'll show you. So we're not new to this argument. What we have done is looked at what the federal judge Posner said in defeating the Pelman Farmer reparations case, and we understood that what came wrong. And we're being criticized as being competitive, as if that's the best thing on record. It's not. It was an effort, but it is not the best construction of the law, because they did not identify human trafficking, which is a bigger crime. Slavery has been oversimplified, overused, misconstrued, but human trafficking and the Supreme Court never dealing with the human trafficking is an error that creates a new level of scholarship activity, which we're bringing it here today live on Baba TV. So Baba TV, thanks. Hopefully we will have this amicus brief done, and your brothers, Brother Reggie, Brother Pat, Dr. Issa, will be talking to the Supreme Court on paper and on record.